Oil provides a vital energy in today's society. It's a fuel source for transportation and can be transformed into other petroleum substances to create an amazing variety of products. It keeps the gears of industry turning and has transformed the province of Alberta into an economic powerhouse and world-leading exporter of energy. But the journey from the first discoveries of oil to the Alberta we know today is a story of explorers and surveyors, visionary entrepreneurs, industrialists and environmentalists, of politics and promise, booms and busts. As a fossil fuel, oil was created from successive layers of organic material, like plants and animals that sank to the bottom of the sea. It took millions of years for the Earth's pressure and heat to transform that organic material into oil. Around the world, oil has been used in countless ways throughout the centuries. Most often, it was burned to provide heat and light. In Canada, it was used for ceremonial and practical purposes by Aboriginal people. Now, early on, the Hudson's Bay Company acquired samples of oil in trade, but had little interest in it. By the mid-19th century, it was discovered that crude oil had a practical use. It could be refined into high-quality kerosene, which soon replaced animal oils in lamps. When the Geological Survey of Canada began to document Canada's natural resources, potential sources for oil were identified, but markets were still limited. An interesting byproduct in the making of kerosene was a waste product they called gasoline that no one had a use for, yet. But it wasn't long before the automobile and its gasoline-powered internal combustion engine became reality. In the early 1900s, lower-priced automobiles like the Ford Model T began to roll off the mass production assembly lines. Car ownership became possible for average people. And if you had a car, you needed gas. So, the demand for oil reached new heights and the search was on. The search for oil had begun in Alberta earlier in 1874, when geologist George Dawson became aware of oil in the Waterton region of southern Alberta. In 1901, businessmen from Calgary and Okotoks formed the Rocky Mountain Development Company and drilled a productive well near Waterton Lakes. It seemed promising, but the well went dry within a few years. Following the early but limited success at Waterton, the search for oil moved to Turner Valley, southwest of Calgary. On May 14, 1914, a well named Dingman No. 1 struck a high-pressure oil and gas deposit. Scores of visitors drove there to see the new discovery well for themselves. And while there, they could fill their gas tanks with the raw but good quality light petroleum known as naphtha that came directly from the well. The boom was on in Alberta. Now, almost overnight, more than 500 oil companies were registered. Calgary became the permanent business center for Alberta's oil sector. Hundreds of oil rigs sprang up to drill for riches in the new oil field, creating new settlements like the town of Turner Valley. Millions of barrels of oil were produced and transported out by wagon, truckload, and later through pipelines. Natural gas, which accompanied the oil, had a lesser value and much of it was flared or burned off as waste. By the 1940s, after having enjoyed several oil booms in the region, the field at Turner Valley had dwindled. Meanwhile, after years of exhaustive searching and drilling, on February 13, 1947, drillers struck oil at Leduc, just south of Edmonton. Oil gushed hundreds of feet in the air. The Leduc oil field was huge, and Leduc No. 1 was soon producing 1,000 barrels of oil a day. Within 5 years, there were 825 productive wells in the Leduc area. The Leduc Discovery marked the start of a new oil boom. New oil fields were discovered all over the province. Even larger oil fields such as Rainbow Zama, Pembina, and West Pembina were found in the province's northwest. Alberta went from being an insignificant oil producer to a major world energy provider. Transcontinental pipelines were constructed to transport the crude oil east to refineries in Ontario and west to tanker ships and markets in California, Chile, and Japan. New communities were established to house workers. Some were simple work camps, while others became new villages and towns. Alberta's cities had to deal with sudden and rapid population growth. Paved roads stretched across Alberta in every direction. Cities like Calgary boasted modern skyscrapers housing many of the new oil companies' head offices. The future looked bright for Alberta, but the 1970s offered only economic and political turbulence. Wars in the Middle East, combined with anti-Western feelings, caused the oil-rich OPEC nations to cut off oil exports to many Western nations. This led to high oil prices and fuel shortages. It also led to a bitter dispute between Alberta's Premier, Peter Lougheed, and the Prime Minister, Pierre Trudeau, over the federal national energy policy. Oil prices crashed in the 1980s. It devastated the Alberta economy, causing increased bankruptcies, mortgage foreclosures, and massive unemployment. Alberta's oil sector and its economy eventually recovered, but from the 1990s onwards, the oil industry in Alberta began to focus more on unconventional sources of oil, such as the oil sands in the northeast. However, it is there that Alberta faced the new reality involving challenges from environmental groups. Well, from the time when the first wells were dug in the Waterton area in 1902 to the landmark discoveries of Turner Valley, Leduc, and the North, the extraction and marketing of Alberta's vast conventional oil resources have shaped the province of Alberta into a modern, dynamic society. Conventional oil remains a significant part of the story of Alberta's energy resources heritage.